Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last week of the Mark series. Kaylee, how are you doing?
Great.
This has
Made
been,
it.
we made it. And this isn't even one of my longer series. So if you like my content, we got some long ones planned for the future. Um, but yeah, this was a great series. We'll be wrapping up the actual discussions of the Book of Mark this week at week 8. But that doesn't mean it's the end. We will have a Q&A episode planned for you guys. I'm thinking of spacing that out so that we have time for people to listen. So I have an episode planned for that off week, some special guests that will get on here. And I think that'll be really fun, probably for some people. And then we'll have the Q&A the following week after that. So submit those questions for the Q&A. If there's not a link in the description, there is a link to the website, and it's just one of the tabs there at the website. So very easy to get to, and we will look forward to answering tons of questions. We wanted to start off today by asking Kaylee the question that I asked her at the start of this series. Tell me, what do you know about Mark? And after going through all this, I think she'll find she has a much more thorough answer.
No, I feel like I should have prepared myself for this question. I knew it was coming, and still I only have thought of it in my head. So, off the top of my head, what I know about Mark, it was written around 66 to 70 AD. They think by John Mark, but he was using Peter as his source for a lot of the story, since obviously Peter was a disciple in there for most of it. The the structure of it is it kind of, I don't know about the structure, but it shows the journey of Jesus as he's kind of in like the Galilee
Mm-hmm.
area for like the majority of the first part,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's kind of the second part is his move to Jerusalem
Mm-hmm.
and like kind of the things that were going on there just before his crucifixion,
Mm-hmm.
and then ends as we're going to talk about today with his crucifixion and resurrection. Um, we learned about Mark and sandwiches, and or chiasms. They're
Chiasms.
kind of tied together, I feel like,
Yep.
but the idea of starting something, going someplace else, and coming back kind of to a similar story as the what you
Mm-hmm.
started with. Um, that's off the top of my head. Is there any
Okay.
prompting you can give me?
Here. How does Mark kind of showcase, because he doesn't provide a lot of commentary, he provides very little his thought.
Mhm.
So, some critics would point to Mark and say that within Mark, there isn't a clear statement in Mark that Jesus was the Son of God,
Hmm.
and that was something added later. So, but that's just if you do like a surface level reading, that's what the feel like is. So, how is Mark being a bit more subtle about it, and maybe through his structure and narrative, how is he indicating, if you read closely, like we have, that Jesus is the Son of God?
Um, Maybe this is not exactly what you're looking for, but I
Hmm.
remember a passage where Jesus refers back to a psalm, I believe, where it says, "My Lord," talking about David, said to my Lord, which is referring to like this future Messiah.
Yep.
And they're saying if he was the son of David, how could he be his Lord? And so
Right.
this idea that Jesus isn't just the son of David, but also, uh, son of God and God. And
Right. And that was kind of Jesus's way. So that was Jesus talking to Pharisees. He
Mhm.
slots himself into that position in the Davidic Psalm. Um, but Mark's doing the same thing. So we talked about it in that first week, um, where Mark uses. a mixture of Malachi and the prophet Isaiah.
Hmm.
And in the slot of Elijah, he puts John the Baptist, clearing the way for the Lord God. And in the spot of God, who shows up is Jesus.
Mm.
So, like, he's doing subtle things like that. That's like equating Jesus and God. Um, and then all throughout the story, this is probably more what I was getting at, but probably asked it poorly. All throughout the story, you have particularly the disciples, but there's other people. Who is this? Who can
Mm.
do that? He's got this strange power. Who has that power? Like he keeps this question keeps coming up because people have assumptions, and then he keeps blowing past those assumptions, and so there's that open question, and then we get to the climax of the story in this week, and what is said by not a Jew but a Roman.
Hmm. Surely this is,
Surely this is the Son of God.
yes.
So like a critic would be like, yeah, but that was a Roman, that wasn't like Mark or a Jew saying that. But that's answering the question that's being asked over and over and over again. You see it even with in the trial, who do they're always asking like, who are you? Who do you say
Hmm.
you are? Whatever. So that question really gets ramped up. So
Hmm.
Mark's using a lot of narrative, a lot of creative structures, which I think we've introduced to some people to lay that out, just because that was the style that he was trained in and what made sense and kind of the style of the Bible. And I think it's beautiful and it's very evident when you look at all that to be like, no, Mark is clearly saying Jesus is God.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think you nailed it. I think the big thing for me was that kind of that narrative structure piece. I had learned about Mark and sandwiches, but this go around, I had heard of chiasms before, but because of a question prompting, I think that I had dug into it and found out that chiasms was a big part of Mark's structure. Next time around, I'll dig in to see how much it was, but I think that also explains the Mark and sandwiches because those are a kind of chiasm structure. Um, so there's definitely a lot more in Mark that you can get to, and I'll just because that was going to be my closing Bible study strategy. I'll just do it now because I was talking about it. Um, so we're wrapping up the book of Mark. Don't feel like check, and I'm done with Mark. Like you can let it sit for a while, but don't be afraid if a small group's like, "Hey, we're going to do the book of Mark," or you take this study and you go to do it with another group. It's like go all in again because you're going to get more out of Mark. This was my second time going through, and I got more out of it, particularly because you're doing it with other people. Doing it with Kaylee this time, she had great questions, and that led me to do these cool little bonus episodes. Um, but as Christians, we're meant to do this together because things are going to stand out for someone else that you didn't notice. So there you go. Anything else before we dive into chapter 15?
Nope, not that I
Okay.
can think of.
We might do it a little bit differently this week, as opposed to reading a ton of what's going on in the book of Mark. I was really excited about a couple of the Old Testament passages, and I want to make sure that we read those. Um, so we'll probably highlight some of the areas that we're going to be talking about, and then go back and jump into the end. But I don't think we have any passages until 15. So, how's about we read the starting point? So, verse 1 through verse 15, and then we'll jump back to Isaiah. Do you want to read here, and then I'll read in when we're in Isaiah?
Mark 1 through 15.
Yep.
And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer? to make? See how these charges they see how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now, at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison whom had committed murder in their insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again asked to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
Well, I wanted to read that first section because there's a couple key phrases that will have echoes when we read Isaiah and Psalm. But the question I got for you is Barabbas. Did you do any digging in? My first question is his name. Do you know what that means? And then you can figure it out because I shared during this series what part of his name means.
Bar is the sun.
Uh-huh. And then what's the rest of his name?
Rabbis, would that be similar to like rabbi, like teacher?
No, you've already used the R because
Oh, okay.
bar. So, and take off the S. What do you get?
Oh, Abba, which is
Which,
father.
so his name is Son of the Father.
Hmm.
So that doesn't really make sense.
I
Because
mean,
it's
most people are sons of a father.
that is true. So
I would say all, I guess.
this is this is a nickname. That is not his actual name. Barabbas is just his nickname, and Mark doesn't highlight it, but did you do any digging what his actual name is?
Mm-mm.
Must be Matthew, but he actually gets his real name. Da-da-da-da. I should have looked up where. All right, I don't know which one it is, but Barabbas's actual name is Jesus. Jesus is a very common name during that time because it's in Hebrew it would have been Yeshua or Joshua. So it's a very common name, and I forget whether it's Luke or John that had that kind of let you know that. So you think about Pilate being all smart. He's like, "Hey, do you want me to release Jesus or Jesus? Well, pick your Jesus." You can kind of see him doing that. But for Mark's purposes, he doesn't want to confuse the reader, so he uses their nickname, which I think is kind of cool. And it's a nickname because it's a nonsensical son of the father. Doesn't really, yeah. So there you go. Fun fact. And it's kind of cool because, especially considering that they shared the same name, that Jesus, it's kind of a symbol of how he's taking our sin. Like he's literally taking his spot.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was a rebel, and so were the other. We typically hear it read in the versions like thieves, but the word is pretty broad. They were probably more like insurrectionists. That's more likely what people would have been crucified for. So you could think maybe they were zealots or whatever. So Barabbas was probably going to be one of the three that was crucified, and Jesus is literally taking his spot on the cross, accounting for his sin literally as I guess he still is literally, but spiritually taking on our sins.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why he's highlighted in all the stories.
Yeah.
So even at the end of Mark, there's still a ton to mine and dig out. Any
Hmm.
thoughts before we go into Isaiah?
Um, no, I just thought it was interesting. My study Bible had pointed out like the main thing that they had the like religious authorities had against Jesus earlier was blasphemy, but because they had to turn him over to the Romans to declare like execution, they turned it like it's instead of more to he's claiming he's king of the Jews, which would have been a like an outright declaration against Caesar. And so they kind of were,
Right.
they knew blasphemy, like Pilate wouldn't care
Yeah.
that like he had this religious
Hmm.
thing. They were trying to make it something that would go against Rome at that point. So that was
Right. And what's also interesting is so you see this, I had this question with, because when you get in the book of Acts, you have, I think, is it Philip, the one that gets stoned?
Stephen.
Stephen. That's right. Stephen's not a common name. I've, never used it that much growing up. Stephen's our dad, Steve. Anyway, Stephen, he starts saying things that they view as blasphemy, and what do? They just kill him by themselves without the Romans. So I've always wondered, like, why didn't they just do that with Jesus? Why did they have to go through the Romans? And it's because they only had jurisdiction within the temple courts to stone people for those severe things, and whereas they were taking Jesus to Caiaphas's house, so the high priest.
Hmm.
Or rather, I think it was the high priest's dad who used to be the old high priest. It was like a family line of corrupt.
Mhm.
A lot of corrupt. If you want to dig into that, that's also good little research. Awesome. We are going to jump over to Isaiah 52 and 53. I've got it set up. And as I read, just focus on just some of the language. These, we're going to do two of them, Isaiah and then one passage from Psalm. Isaiah 52, and what this passage we're going to read is about the suffering servant. And you just read it and you go like that. That's Jesus. Like, it's so clear. And then we'll talk about the other one that we'll read. But you just listen to all the things that we've heard and you kind of know the story of what's going to happen and you'll see all the connections. So we're going to start Isaiah 52, verse 13, and we actually go through 53, I think all the way through. Yeah, here we go. See, my servant will be successful. He will be raised and lifted up and greatly exalted. Already, right off the bat. There you go. Just as many were appalled at you, his appearance was so disfigured that he did not look like a man, and his form did not resemble a human being. Again, very much. So he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths because of him, for they will see what had not been told them, and they will understand what they had not heard. This is the idea of the message going out. Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He didn't have an impressive form or majesty that we should look at him, no appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of suffering who knew what sickness was. He was like someone people turned away from. He was despised, and we didn't value him. Yet he himself bore our sickness, and he carried our pains. But we in turn regarded him stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced because of our rebellion. Pierced, key word there. Crushed because of our iniquities. Punishment for our peace was on him, and we are healed by his wounds. Like that is so clearly what the whole crucifixion is about. We all went astray like sheep. We all have turned to our own way, and the Lord has punished him, not us, him, for the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Kind of like in the trials, he was just silent. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before her shearers, he did not open his mouth. He was taken away because of oppression and judgment. And who considered his fate? For he was cut off from the land of the living. He was struck because of my people's rebellion. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, but he was with a rich man at his death. Could be a little point to help me out. Joseph of Arimathea. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had done no violence and he had not spoken deceitfully. Yet the Lord was pleased to crush him severely. When you make him a guilt offering, he will see his seed, he will prolong his days, and by his hand the Lord's pleasure will be accomplished. After his anguish he will see light, and he will be satisfied by his knowledge. My righteous servant will justify many, and will carry their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him the many as a portion, and he will receive the mighty as spoil, because he willingly submitted to death and was counted among the rebels, like the others on the cross. Yet he bore the sin of many and interceded for the rebels. And I told Kaylee before we recorded, my only note for that passage was, wow, because it's so spot on.
Hmm. I don't know if like this passage just reminds me of our childhood because this is one that we memorized when we were homeschooled. And I like don't know if I like realized growing up like what was going on of like this was in the Old Testament way before Christ even came,
Yep.
like and written about like his in the future and just like how that
Yep.
is crazy amazing.
And so sometimes I complain about like how the Bible is taught growing up. I'm not mad about that part. Like I think it's good for have kids memorize stuff. Like I think Isaiah 53 was one that we just had memorized. It's just that it stopped there. And then by middle school, it was just like we moved on. Well, we went to public school by middle school, so that's probably why. But like within the church and stuff, there's no more seeing how the Bible connects.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll probably create a whole episode on this, but I think it was just because of the times we grew up in. We grew up in the kind of church was default mode, and then the early 2000s kind of started to switch that. And I don't think many people were well prepped for how the internet attacked a lot of Christianity because there was a lot of holes in Christianity because people didn't take like apologetics seriously or anything like that. And so I think a lot of our peers were like, "Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay, I guess I'll find some other worldview."
Hmm.
So that's what I'm here to change, one Bible study at a time.
Yeah. The other thing I have this noted in my Bible,
Hmm.
like I wrote it down, so I must have studied it at one point, but there's a story in Acts about an Ethiopian eunuch who's actually reading this passage. And I
Hmm.
forget who the disciple was, I want to say, like,
That's Philip, I think. No, yeah, it's Philip, right?
maybe.
I think it was Philip.
I
I've said that
it's
twice
in
now.
Acts 8, so we can double check. I have that written down. Um, but he's able, like, he sees this guy reading this passage, and he's able, yep, it is Philip. He's able to come and then tell him about
Hmm.
Jesus. And so I thought, like, that's just a cool story of like how we can like reveal Christ
Hmm.
through the Old Testament
And I
to
think
others.
it's that story and the one of Jesus walking with the two men to um, the road to Emmaus.
Hmm.
So, and it says like he was showing how all the scriptures were revealed in Jesus. And it's like, well, the only scriptures they had was our Old Testament. So
Hmm.
like Jesus saw these things pointing to him.
Wouldn't you have loved to be in that conversation of Jesus explaining
Give me a
the
time
Old?
machine and I'll just like I'll be one of those guys. Like I want that sermon.
Hmm.
But that's what motivated me year-ish, 2 years ago when I kind of read that and was like, oh, I go to the Old Testament and that's not like maybe you see a few things, but like that wasn't the big takeaway. And then I think the next thing I kind of learned, I did Bible Thinkers, Jesus in the Old Testament. That one plus his Evidence for the Bible are two great series to do if you're kind of interested in getting more, because it just opens up the whole Old Testament to like, look how much it's pointing towards Jesus. It opens up this idea of typology, which is really cool. The Christophanies and theophanies. So just a lot of cool things that open up. And I think that was the start of my, okay, I'm going to be a Bible nerd journey.
Hmm.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So we got a bit of going. Okay. I think we're going to go back into Mark Um, so he is now we're gonna fly through and kind of just summarize a bit of this. He's gonna be mocked by the military. Isaiah pointed towards that. He's gonna be crucified between two criminals. I think there's one place I want to highlight because it had oh, here we go. So verse 21, they forced a man coming in from the country who was passing by to carry Jesus' cross. He was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. So you've been around. Why is he telling us who he's the father of? Why is that important?
The only reason I know this is because I've listened to this in Bible Thinker. So,
Mhm.
um, he's telling this because the people who are reading this probably know like Alexander and Rufus, and we can see that in Romans 8. Um, he Paul actually references
Mhm.
Rufus in Rome,
Mhm.
or like greets Rufus,
Yep.
which a lot of scholars think is the same person. And so it's just almost like this, hey, this was this guy's dad. You go ask them about this. Like they'd be able
Yep.
to like affirm this
Right.
story.
It's like Simon might not be around, but hey, you guys know Rufus.
Hmm.
He talked to us. Like, ask him. Like, this was
Hmm.
legit. Um, yes. Thank you for doing all that research because I didn't have which letter it was in. But so, yeah, they were probably at least Rufus, if not both, were part of the church up in Rome. And where do most people think Mark wrote out this gospel was up in Rome, because that's where Peter kind of landed himself at. So Mark would have known Rufus. So, and we know Mark at some point did go to Rome at least once, if not more times. So just a cool little, oh, what's the term? There's a term for when multiple books of the Bible, an unintentional something, but it's not like they plan to have two bits of information that cooperate to build a bigger
Elaborate.
collaborate to make a better cooperate, I think is the word I wanted. Your
I'm sure
stories
that.
cooperate. They make sense of each other. I think that's a word. I'm coining it. So yeah, I just love pointing those out. Okay. Then he gets crucified between two criminals. I made the point that like he was literally taking the place of Barabbas.
Mhm.
And
I think one thing that would be helpful to point out before we move on is when he's mocked by um, the soldiers, they take all
mhm,
of his clothes and cast lots to divide them up. But we'll
yes. Did I
be
already
important
pass
later.
that? They're hitting him. What verse is that?
Um, 16 through 20, or maybe not.
It
Maybe
doesn't
that gets
have
later.
the casting lots. I don't think Mark has the detail about the casting lots because I think that happens when he's up on the cross, probably in Matthew. But let's take a
Yeah, sorry.
5 second detour.
It's actually 24.
24. Divided is closed. There it is. Casting lots. Yep, which is important. Memory note because we're gonna come back to that. So, and I also want to get to so they crucified him. They put the Jesus King of the Jews. They would have put placards above a crucified person about what they were being crucified for, because the point of it was a show to say, and you better not do this too. It's just ironic that they were putting a true statement above his head. Um, and this is a nice callback, one on his right and one on his left, where we heard that phrase before.
Yeah, when the James and John asked if
Hmm.
they could be on his right and left.
And some people mocking him. What was I looking for? Ah, so verse 33. I think this is cool because of my science background. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. So apparently a 3 hour stretch, darkness. Um, and there is extra biblical evidence that there was some sort of darkness on this day. And there's a whole bunch of early, like close to this event writers who will be like, oh yeah, so there was an eclipse. Never mind that the Passover happens during a full moon. So the moon's on the other side of the planet. So it can't be an eclipse. And eclipses don't last 3 hours. So people, like, it's documented that there's the darkness and people try to make the excuse. So it's just like, very interesting. And my science brain goes, I want to know.
If anyone wants to see the most excited person in the world, you need to go watch Jared watching an eclipse. I've never seen
Ah.
such a reaction.
Yeah, I went and live streamed for my school district. I didn't have a good camera, so I couldn't really show it, but my family who was watching said just watching my reaction was worth it because I kind of lost my mind. And it was so cool. Like you see that and you're just like, God is awesome. That is.
Mm.
Um, okay. So we are at the death of Jesus. I'm just going to read a verse 33 and 34. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you abandoned me? Caleb, before today, if you've ever heard a sermon or something like that, or you've read this, what have you been taught based off this verse?
I mean, I didn't know. I just kind of assumed this was Jesus on the cross,
Hmm.
and God was leaving him or like turned away from him because he's now taking on our sin.
Turned away
And
from him. Do you know
uh
that doesn't show up in the Bible? That
yeah,
God turned his back on him?
yeah. And I
And
don't remember if it was Bible Thinker or you this summer that said that he was quoting from Psalms there. So I hadn't
hmm
heard anything about that until more recently.
Yeah, just growing up, like, so this is the point of like what gets me excited is all my life this would have been used for our sin is so bad that God had to turn his back on Jesus when he took on the sin. It's like, oh, and I'm not saying that's like our sin is bad, but I don't think that's why Mark put this here. May not be the only reason. And as what you'll see is what we're going to go back and read. So, and I might have mentioned this over summer when I did bring this up. So, how do we know that what Jesus is saying here is telling us to go back and read something else? Well, back in Jesus' time, and in fact, for most of forever, there weren't numbers in our Bibles. And so, if you were a rabbi at the time of Jesus and you wanted your disciples to recall up a verse, you couldn't just say, like, hey, go read Psalm 22. What do you notice? You couldn't do that. So, what they would do is they would just call out the first phrase of something. And then everyone would be like, okay, okay, yep, let me start jogging their memory. I know the passage. And then when he starts teaching, they know what he's talking about. So, and this was pointed out by a Bible thinker, and it just blew my mind that no one had ever like sat down and been like, look, because it's just so cool. So, my God, why have you abandoned me? And this is the first line in Psalms 22. So that is now where we're flipping. Esther, you probably had it bookmarked, didn't you? I will encourage you to just go through and read this on your own, for those that can. Oh, that's okay. Um, but I will start reading and then I'll kind of pause a little bit how I was in Isaiah to kind of highlight some phrases and talk about a few things. But so this is written by David about himself as he was fleeing Saul, I believe. And so some of it makes sense for David, but then some of it you go like, I don't remember that happening to David. And it's like he's being kind of metaphorical, but it's like quite literal for Jesus. And so this also for me like screams the Holy Spirit inspired writing. So here we go. Psalm 22. My God, why have you abandoned me? That's what Jesus said. Why are you so far from my deliverance and from my words of groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. By night, yet I have no rest. That kind of gave me the idea of in the garden. But you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our ancestors trusted in you. They trusted and rescued them. They cried to you and were set free. They trusted you and were not disgraced. But I am a worm and not a man. We could go on a little side tangent on that worm word. Um, should I go on the side tangent? It's really cool.
Now that you brought it up.
Um, you'll have to Google. It's called the crimson worm because there is most of the time the word worm is brought up a lot. I think especially in Ezekiel, somebody calls themselves a worm a lot. Um, but there's like a general use for like a maggot or worm. This word that's used here is a specific type of worm that was in Israel. So it's a different Hebrew word that's typically used. So it's identifying something called the crimson worm, which the female crimson worm, when it's in its life cycle, will crawl up on a tree, create a hard shell, and it's all red. So we're on a tree, red. It lays all of its eggs inside that shell, and all the larvae eat the mom. So it's like giving up its life. And then it turns into this white, flaky wax afterwards, white as snow. Like, if you look it up, there's tons of articles about how it like connects. And that could just be like, oh, that's very interesting. Or it's like, that's a little too interesting. Like, anyways. So very cool. You can go on a rabbit trail for that. Scorned by mankind and despised by people. That happened to Jesus up on the cross. He was being scorned. And everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer. They shake their heads. Some of that language is exact in the book of Mark. He relies on the Lord. Let him save him. And this is in quotes. So, like, this is what people are saying. And that's exactly what people said in Mark. Let the Lord rescue him, since he takes pleasure in him. It was you who brought me out of the womb, making me secure at my mother's breast. I was given over to you at birth. You have been my God from my mother's womb. And that gave me the idea of the miraculous conception. Don't be far from me because distress is near and there is no one to help. Again, that gave me garden vibes. Many bulls surround me, strong ones of Bashan encircle me. When we did this I had this verse for a different series and we did it in group. And somebody asked me, like, hey, did these animals mean anything? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And so I actually looked up. So when we read about bulls, you can think of like the leadership or rulers. And so when you read, they open their mouths against me. So like this would be the religious leaders. They're the leaders. So that's what the bulls would be referring to. Lions mauling and roaring. Lions, very symbolic of the Romans. I am poured out like water. That's just directly to, and all my bones are disjointed. And again, this is like, when did that happen to David? But like that literally happened to Jesus up on the cross because it like disjointed your shoulders. And my heart is like wax melting within me. My strength is dried up like baked clay. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. And we know that he had that thirst. You put me into the dust of death, buried. For dogs have surrounded me. A gang of evildoers have closed in on me. Dogs would be referring to criminals. It's like the negative connotation there. They pierced my hands and feet. I don't know how more direct you need to be. Like, I can count all my bones. People look and stare at me. And here's what thank you for pointing out. They divided my garments among themselves and they cast lot for my clothing. Like, when I first read this in connection, I was just like, ah. All right. And then I'll speed through the rest of it, but and make one more comment. But you, Lord, don't be far away. My strength come quickly to help me. Rescue my life from the sword, only my life from the power of these dogs. Save me from the lion's mouth, from the horns of wild oxen. And then it says, "You answered me." And I think the rest of it kind of speaks to the deliverance from all that pain. So it's very cool, but I'll just read through it all. "I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you in the assembly. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, honor him. All you descendants of Israel, revere him. For he has not despised or abhorred the torment of the oppressed. He did not hide his face from him, but listened when he cried to him for help. I will give praise in the great assembly because of you. I will fulfill my vows before those who fear you. The humble will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of nations will bow down before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord. He rules the nations. All who prosper on earth will eat and bow down. All those who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Even the one who cannot persevere his life, their descendants will serve him. The next generation will be told about the Lord. They will come and declare his righteousness to a people yet to be born, and they will declare what he has done.
Wow.
Wow. That's all the notes that I had there, other than my notes actually in the Psalms. So, yeah. I mean, it's just like so painstakingly obvious. That has to be like one of the things Jesus talked about on the road to Emmaus. Like, hey, did you guys know that psalm? Like, think about Jesus. You know, like it's so plain and evident. So, had you had a chance to connect that when you learned about it earlier, or is this the first time reading through that psalm in connection?
And that was the first time um, that I'd really heard and read that song.
It has become my favorite Bible passage. So, and I think that's kind of the structure and purpose of Mark. That he's not writing this direct commentary, but like here's all the breadcrumbs. Go and search for it.
Hmm.
It's not hidden. All right. Going back to Mark, and I'm just gonna highlight. So they kind of the people around there didn't really get what he was saying. They thought he was calling for Elijah. They tried to offer him a drink. And then Jesus let out a loud cry and breathed his last. Then the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. My question there was, do we have any extra biblical information? Like, did that happen? Or like, I don't know. That's just kind of interesting. Like, you'd think something like that would have been widespread enough that we could verify it with other sources as well.
Yeah. But I wonder, like, if the authorities,
Would hide it, yeah.
yeah, if they were like, that this would, you know, make us look bad. So let's just
And
patch that up.
you would think like that happened. You're like, oh, well then surely they saw the error of their ways.
Hmm.
It's like the sky turned dark, your curtain ripped in two. Maybe we shouldn't
From
have
top to
crucified this.
bottom, which I think is important to note because
Yeah.
if a human's doing it, you're gonna, you know,
Go from bottom
you
up.
know,
Yeah,
I think it's fairly tall, so you wouldn't be able to just grab the top and rip down like that.
I think you're right. And then the point I wanted to highlight. So the centurion who was standing opposite him saw the way he breathed his last, and that made me question like, so he saw how he breathed his last, and he gave a loud cry before that. So he saw that part, and that made him say, truly, this man was the Son of God. So it makes me wonder, like, what was that breathing out the last? What was that loud cry all like? But I don't think I can, there's probably not a way I can find that answer. So, not today. So that kind of ends that part. And then we'll get to the rest of it, which there isn't that much left because half of chapter 16 is um, kind of there. But here's what I'd like to point out as we start reading through the rest. You'll notice, well, Peter is now pretty much off screen. He's done in the book of Mark. He's not brought up again, which would leave kind of hanging in the air like, oh no, Peter, what happened to Peter? Other gospels pick up his story, so we know that he is redeemed. But you'll notice right here in verse 40, there was also women watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. And so what you're going to get repeated over and over is all these women's names in different scenarios. So watching were these women, and then watching the burial, and then coming back to the burial. He's either restating the names or it's a different group of women because, and this is a very important point for apologetics. These were the only sources that Mark could go to for these specific events, the burial um, outside of Joseph of Arimathea, but maybe he wasn't around anymore. So these women, and did you look into this or listen to Bible Thinker stuff on this?
Um, the only thing I really know about it is like in that time period, women like in court, their
Mhm.
testimony wouldn't have been allowed like
Right.
um to verify things in court. And so they're not the fact that Mark is even using them as a testimony is
Hmm.
like almost not like I don't know, demeaning's the right word, but if you're trying to prove something or like make something up, like you wouldn't use women as
Correct.
the sources.
Correct.
But this just shows a little.
And I don't think it was just at that time. I think that's been for a long part of human history up until fairly recently. Women being more frantic or whatever. But one, he's doing this because literally none of the men were there, so he has to do this. But the fact that he does include it instead of being vague, that would have been embarrassing. And you typically don't make up embarrassing things if you're making something up. And so it goes to the historicity of the document that, hey, if it's telling the truth because if he was lying, he would have picked Peter or Thomas or John and James. Like he would have picked other people or just left it out. So,
Do you have any, going back to Peter at this point, do you have
mhm.
any thoughts if Peter was the source of this? We obviously hear stories about him in the other gospels after the resurrection. If he was the source, why wouldn't he include those stories in
Stories
here?
at the end.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't he have the stories added about, oh, and now, hey, hey, Mark, make sure you get the part like Jesus forgave me? That's a good point. One theory, because we're going to get to it in a second, is some people think the end of Mark was lost. And so maybe the original did have that. So we
Mm.
could put that up as a possibility. Or Peter didn't feel the need to prove himself. Or while Mark is writing this, there's Matthew's been being written at the same time. They're collaborating, and Mark's like, he's gonna, or Luke, he knows Luke's writing this big story, and he's like, oh, he's gonna be covering all that. Could be something like that. Um,
I would
or
feel like if like Mark has been so strategic in his structure this whole time that I think he's trying to lead up to the resurrection and like
yeah,
that's it.
that's the point.
Yeah, instead of like, adding the other ones have more of a kind of flowing narrative that it
Hmm.
makes a little bit more sense, I guess, to add them in. I
Yeah,
don't know, but
I think it all made sense to Mark, and yep. But I do love these stories. So that's kind of getting us to chapter 16.
I do have one
Go for
question.
it.
We always say like Jesus died and then 3 days later, and I didn't think about this until like a couple years ago. I was like, so if Jesus died on a Friday and he rose on a Sunday, it's like Saturday to Friday to Saturday to Sunday. That's 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they say 3 days?
Are you counting fence post or fences? This is a classic math problem.
Mm,
Um, if you think about having two fence sections, how many fence posts are there to hold those two fences together? One,
three.
two, three. So in their culture, you count the fence post. Whereas we think of, let me count the time from now. So I'm counting this part. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not counting that first post. You don't
Mm-hmm.
hit one. So I think that's one way that you could explain it is that's how they counted was you count the days and it's not really about the passage of time. I mean, they didn't have like exact time. So that makes sense that they would just kind of be like, that's 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, you see in the Bible, and I think even in the book of Mark, the use of 3 days, and it is very similar to this, where it wasn't what we would consider 3 days, but could be seen as 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like that's breaking a rule in their time period. And I just don't have, I remember digging into this and hearing about this. There are other examples of this phrase or very similar ones where that shouldn't be a big issue. So,
Mm-hmm.
great question. And it has been answered. I'm sure there's longer proofs or videos if people want to go find it.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you read 16 and go through verse 8, and then we'll have a good discussion about the end.
When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large, and entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe. And they were alarmed. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where he was laid, where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
And then you hit what's definitely not taught in church, a weird spot in your Bible that says, hey, the earliest manuscripts don't include this. One of my Bibles is all italicized and smaller. This one just has a little mark. What's yours do for this next section?
Yeah, mine has that italicized and then has the whole like scripture also italicized.
So before doing this series, had you run across this before? Did you know that there were multiple, not even just the one, like people put different spots where it ends? Were you even aware of that?
I have read through Mark before, probably a year or two ago, and that was the first time I had like
Yeah.
seen this.
And I feel like, hey, we should make sure that we teach people this because if you're like just a Christian on your own reading and you get to this, you're like, wait, what? What's going on here?
Yeah.
Now can I trust things? And
Do you have any good resources? Because this is something that I've been like listening to a little bit more
hmm
and like listening to some apologetic stuff. And I feel like I'm at like, I don't know, a crisis, but
hmm
like I keep here, like I'm listening to good podcasts about it that like provide explanations.
hmm
But when you're taught like your whole life, like the Bible, like is, I mean, I don't want to say the Bible's not perfect, but like,
you were maybe not explicitly taught, but in your mind, you have what people refer to as the golden tablet handed from on high. Like, here is
hmm
the perfect word, all done. It was perfectly copied all through the generations, and you have
hmm
the exact, like, golden version, right? No
yeah,
one tells you that, but that's what we feel.
hmm And I've been like learning more about it over
Hmm.
like the last year, but it's like I'm learning just enough to make me like really second guess this thing that I grew up in,
Yep.
but maybe not like digging deep enough into it to feel like, oh, this feels fine.
Yep.
And so the last podcast I listened to, he kind of phrased it up that made me feel a little better, but like I don't know if it still made me feel
Hmm.
great about it. But he was like, as the like we obviously have had like the New Testament for almost 2000 years
Hmm.
now. Um, and between all of that, like we keep finding more and more manuscripts between that time where we can
Hmm.
be more confident that what we have is what it was originally written.
Hmm.
But the Bible has existed between that whole time, and it was sufficient enough for people back
Hmm.
in 400 AD as it is now for
Yeah.
us who
Yep.
have even more confidence in it.
Yep.
I was like, well, that's better. But like when you have this like idea, there's this is, you know, the golden tablet word of God, and it is
Yes.
like
So
exactly, you know,
thank you for honesty and open that up because, and I'm actually going to start my next series this way. What you are experiencing is you had a paradigm. Paradigm is like how you see the world.
mhm,
And you got presented evidence that was very persuasive, like seeing this part that says like, ah, doesn't fit, or all the other podcasts you hear that is starting to break away that paradigm. So, and paradigms are like, these are, no one told you those words, but that's how you've interpreted it. That's like a part of you. And what's happening is that's breaking away, and it's a scary thing because what's going to replace it? And it leaves question marks and all those things,
mhm,
anxiety. Um, and what I'm going to encourage my listeners to do, both in this scenario and when we start the next series, is to just allow that paradigm to break down, but find the right people to help piece together a new paradigm for how you see things.
mhm.
So you're that paradigm of the golden tablet handed on from on high is being broken. And I think that's actually healthy because it opens up so many other areas. But let's make sure that we get the right people speaking life into, but you can still have confidence, which is what you were saying.
Yeah.
I
And I
already
think
mentioned,
something that can like helps bring me a little bit more confidence as there are theologians who are much more educated in this, much wiser than I am,
yep.
and they feel okay with
Hmm.
these differences in manuscripts
Yep.
that none of it is affecting our theology in like any
Yep.
major way.
Yep. And we'll
So,
talk a bit more about this. This is obviously, I think, one of the biggest, I think this is the biggest block of biblical text that's like the up in the air bit, right?
mhm,
So, um, I think this gives the most shock, but that's fine because it opens up a conversation for people that haven't been exposed to this or kind of just like brushed it off because it was kind of affecting that paradigm that they have. Um, but so let's talk about this just a little bit. But real quick off the top of my head, Bible thinkers, evidence for the Bible. He covers some of the things Kaylee's talked about how you can be certain about all these things. And he does it in a very methodical and life-giving way. So that's a good series to listen to. Um, I always start with him because he's very grounded, um, and always skeptical of scholarship, which I think is a healthy spot to start if you're kind of new at Christianity. And then I like to point to the Bible Project. And I don't think that I agree with them theologically on everything. I don't think that they're like way out. Be wary. I think some people brought forth some things that they've said, but most of what they're trying to point out is the narrative structures of the Bible. But they do get into, particularly if you find this stuff interesting, do their free classroom because they start off with that conversation about the paradigm, like, hey, how you viewed the Bible, if that's how you view it, you're coming at it incorrectly and you're going to miss out on a lot of structure, and a lot of the meaning. And they help us to kind of break that down and build it up. And it's very helpful. So there's a couple of areas that you can go to. You do have a bit of, like you've experienced, a bit of uncomfortability just for a second. But then once you realize, well, I mean, I think I kind of made that up myself. So, and this is actually, I know some people are and aren't fans of The Chosen. And I think you don't really watch it, right? Right. And I'm fine either way. But what I found when I first started watching it that I liked is I'm not watching it going, well, this accurately depicts it. Like it's not the gospel. But what I noticed as I was watching is like, huh, that's not how I pictured it. And then I went, but why did I picture it? And I realized like I would have never
Hold
have
on, I think your sound cut out.
hello, hello.
Okay, there you are.
I would have never have described the disciples as old white bearded men. But like when I really saw what they were portraying in The Chosen, I went, oh no, I just still had that cartoonish Bible picture in my head. Even I would have told you that's not it, but like that's still what it was. And
Hmm.
so it was just really good to watch and be like, you know what? That's an interesting way to depict it. I need to get rid of what I've been thinking. And I don't have to adopt what they have, but just not have those in my head.
Hmm.
So I like having those things just so I can get out of my own self, essentially. I don't think we're gonna read this longer ending of Mark. And some people put the ending at different spots, but needless, here's the thing that you need to know is everything, and in my Bible study, I have all the verse references, but everything you find in this last section, you can find elsewhere. It's not like there's some crazy new theology that's going to change everything. It's picking up pieces from elsewhere. The one thing that's kind of a bit weird is the part about snakes, but that could easily just be in reference to Paul and how he picked up a snake, got bit, didn't hurt him. But there have been people and groups that took that verse and were like, well, we're having snakes in service. Put your hand in the snake pit if you truly believe in Jesus. And it's like, that's not what it's telling us to do. So if you see that, just leave that church. Maybe tell them that they need to turn away. But um and here's what Bible Thinker has a actually he spent multiple episodes, I think, going through this. And kind of what I've come away with is I think the original ending, now it could be that the original ending was lost. I'll leave that as a possibility. But I do think that he originally ended it there, where it says, and they said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. Because it just leaves like, oh, it's just done. It's an abrupt ending. And Bible Thinker's point on it was probably intentionally abrupt because these were meant to be read to the churches. And so you could read that and then you stop. And what that does is that opens up the door for people to share their own testimony. Like, oh, yeah. And then I know that, now people in the congregation start to share and add on their own experiences. Um, I also like that it ends abruptly because most people don't realize the original Old Testament ended abruptly as well. Trivia question. What did the Hebrew Old Testament, what was their last book of the Bible?
Was it Kings?
Oh, so close. It was King's Twins, The Chronicles, which would have been, they would have just had one Chronicles. They didn't split it like we did. So that would have been the last book in their Tanakh, is what they would have called it. Um, and most of our translations kind of fix the grammar so that our last sentence makes sense. Um, so mine says, any of his people among you may go up, and may the Lord his God be with him. So that sounds like a complete sentence. But if you, I always like to use Bible Ref or Bible Gateway to give me like a lot of different versions.
Mhm.
If you find a version that's very like more literal, try and show the original Hebrew, you'll find that it's more flipped. And it's like, may the Lord his God be with him. Any of his people among you may go up. And that's how it ends. So the original Hebrew Old Testament ended with a big cliffhanger. And so I like the idea that Mark's like, yeah, we'll just leave it at a cliffhanger. So a little tidbit there for you, a little sneak peek of what you'll get in my next series, Through the Line of Jesus, because that's how we talked about it in that. So, all right, I've been talking for a while. Anything from you? Thoughts,
Your
questions?
sound cut out again.
I just need to stop scooching back. How's that?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Any thoughts, questions from you? That's what I was saying.
No, that's interesting. I like it.
Yep. And here's the fun part about reading the Bible. You don't have to have
It cut
the
out again.
answer. Oh boy. Unplug, replug.
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay. You just let me know if it stops. So, as you learn more about the Bible, you don't have to always know the answers. So, like I've kind of shared here, it's like I leave up the possibility of this. This is the theory that I like. Here are other options. As long as you have good options there, you just wait for more data or you just trust God. And as long as there are good options, I don't feel like I have to pick one.
Hmm.
And yeah, so you should learn to be fine with that because there's lots of question marks in the Bible and we have to leave them as question marks.
Hmm.
This is the sound of me closing my Bible and in the Mark series. Hopefully, my
I
sound didn't
couldn't
cut out.
hear it.
For
Does it
those of you
record?
that here, you still didn't hear it? Am I coming through?
I can hear you, but the mic must not want to do shutting noises.
I hope that it's coming through for the video and it's just you.
It could
We're
be.
gonna say it's you. Okay. Um, well, I think I had fun on this journey.
Yeah, me too. Learned a
Uh,
lot.
yes, and even though this was my second or third time through Mark, because I go through it a couple times while creating these series, I still got a ton out of it. I love the questions that you asked. And for those astute listeners, I know I missed a bonus episode about moving mountains. That will just be the first question we ask in our Q&A, but we do need more questions, so submit those to our form, link description or on our website. So, coming up next week for you guys, I'll be interviewing a special guest or two about small groups and how they do it. I think it will be an interesting conversation. And then the week after that will be the Q&A. And then as the new year starts, which is just who could have timed this? Not me. I didn't plan this far ahead. We'll be starting a new series in the New Year's on Through the Line of Jesus, which is perfect because it starts in Genesis. And we love starting in Genesis for the new year. So, but you need to tell your friends and share the podcast and get others involved. Like, comment, subscribe. Am I forgetting anything in this super professional podcast?
No, if you want to stay informed of new things coming, go on our website and join our email list.
We have an email list. As you notice, we're not on social media and we won't bombard you. We just keep you in the loop. Awesome. And I've seen we've got 20 something people that have been like pretty live. with us, and I'm sure that number will grow as we reach new people. And I've got cool little flyers pass out to churches so that they know about our stuff. So, alrighty. I will see you guys in the next video and for the next series. Bye. Oh, and Kaylee won't be in the next series. So you got to say bye.
Hi, guys. It's fun getting to go on this journey with you all.
And don't worry, she'll be around. Just not for the series. Okay, bye.